will now recognize myself for an opening statement. I'd like to begin by thanking all the witnesses for being here to discuss this important topic before us today. I'd also like to thank Fervo Energy for leading an exciting and informative field tour of the cutting-edge Cape Station project just this morning. In the coming years, the United States will face unprecedented growth in energy demand as we race to win the AI war against China and bring gigawatts of new data center capacity online. And all of the above approach for energy development is the only option we have to move forward. As we saw today, reliable, clean, baseload geothermal power has incredible potential to help meet our growing needs. Geothermal plants already supply power across 7 states and Hawaii, and that's just the beginning. For example, the Department of Energy estimates that next-generation geothermal technologies like the Enhanced Geothermal System, or EGS, that we toured this morning, could provide up to 90 gigawatts of electricity by 2050, enough to power millions of homes and businesses across this great nation. Unfortunately, cumbersome leasing and permitting practices on federal lands have prolonged project timelines and increased cost for geothermal developers. I'm proud to say that House Republicans are leading the charge to end these inefficiencies and unleash geothermal energy on federal lands. Just last week, the House Natural Resources Committee advanced its historic reconciliation title, which will generate $18.5 billion in new revenue and savings for the American people. This package includes mandates for annual geothermal lease sales, which will contribute $23 million in revenue for the federal government and increase certainty for geothermal energy producers. While these changes are a vital step in the right direction, there is much more work to be done to allow geothermal power to scale up and reach its full potential. The Bureau of Land Management, or BLM, oversees geothermal development on federal lands. In fact, geothermal energy was the first type of renewable energy that the BLM approved for production on federal lands, dating back to 1978. However, as we've seen from other forms of energy operating on public lands, the permitting process for geothermal is mirrored by duplicative requirements and lengthy regulatory delays. Federal geothermal projects must complete up to 6 stages of National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, review throughout the development process. This can take up to 10 years and does not include endless cycles of frivolous litigation. We can and must do better. To address these barriers, Republican members of the House Natural Resources Committee have championed legislation that limits NEPA reviews for low-impact geothermal activities in previously studied areas, forces the BLM to process geothermal permits in a timely manner, and ensures that the geothermal wells on non-federal lands are not subject to delays in our broken federal regulatory process. If enacted, these provisions would provide geothermal developers greater certainty needed to spur investment in research, development, exploration, and production. While these pieces of legislation are a great start, I look forward to hearing from our witnesses to identify further reforms and ideas to responsibly expedite the geothermal permitting process. As we know, America has a wealth of resources right here at home that can satisfy our growing energy needs and produce reliable baseload power. We must work together to responsibly develop these resources to put America back on a path of strength. I again want to thank the witnesses for joining us today, and I look forward to hearing your testimony. I now want to recognize Representative Malloy for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome to Utah. Welcome to the 2nd District. I want to thank everyone who's here participating, and especially SUU for hosting. It's good to be back here. For far too long, the promise of geothermal energy has gone underappreciated and underutilized in our national energy conversation. Despite its incredible potential, geothermals face regulatory delays, permitting hurdles, and a lack of investment that doesn't match the scale of the opportunity. Let me be clear, geothermal is reliable and affordable. Unlike intermittent sources, geothermal delivers steady 24/7 baseload power. It doesn't depend on weather or foreign supply chains. It's a homegrown resource sitting right under our feet. At a time when our electric grid is under stress and global energy markets are incredibly unstable, we need dependable domestic energy sources. Geothermal offers exactly that resilient American energy that we can count on day and night. Utah's leading the way in showing what's possible. Earlier today, we had the chance to look at the groundbreaking work being done by Fervo Energy in Beaver County, and they're pioneering enhanced geothermal systems, EGS, here in Utah's 2nd District. These innovations are putting our state on the map as a model for innovative and dispatchable energy solutions. EGS represents a game-changing opportunity. It can unlock geothermal energy in places where conventional geothermal just hasn't been feasible, vastly expanding the resource base. With the right regulatory framework, we can make EGS a major part of our national energy strategy. Geothermal also means good jobs here in Utah, especially in rural communities like those in the West Desert. From drilling crews to high-tech engineers, these are careers that can support families and strengthen local economies. That's why there's growing bipartisan support for removing barriers and letting geothermal compete on a level playing field with other energy sources. Despite this progress, geothermal still faces significant challenges. Complex and outdated permitting processes slow down projects and create uncertainty for developers. Even when the geology is ideal, it can take years to get a green light to drill. In states like Utah, where so much promising geothermal potential lies beneath federally managed lands, the permitting backlog is especially problematic. Developers are forced to navigate the maze of duplicative reviews, unclear timelines, and inconsistent agency coordination. This bureaucratic tangle discourages investment and leaves too many high-potential projects stuck in limbo. That's why I introduced the GEO Act to modernize geothermal permitting by ensuring federal agencies act promptly, even when projects face delays from ongoing court proceedings. And also, the Streamlining Thermal Energy Through Advanced Mechanics, or STEAM Act, to ensure that geothermal development isn't hindered by unnecessary regulatory delays. It gives geothermal projects the same flexibility oil and gas has had for almost 2 decades. Today's hearing is an opportunity to identify real, actionable steps Congress can take to unleash geothermal development. From permitting reform to interagency coordination, we need a system that works for innovators, not against them. And we need to be able to produce power here in this country and here in this state. And I'm excited to see us having a hearing about how to do that better. Thank you for being here, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady for her statement. We will now move to introduce our witnesses. Let me remind the witnesses that under committee rules, they must limit their oral statements to 5 minutes, but their entire statement will appear in the hearing record. We use timing lights. When you begin, the light will turn green. When you have 1 minute remaining, the light will turn yellow. And at the end of your testimony, the 5 minutes, the light will turn red. And I will ask you to please complete your statement. I will also allow all witnesses to testify before member questioning. Our first witness this afternoon is Mr. Tim Latimer, and he is the Chief Executive Officer at Fervo Energy, and he is stationed in Houston, Texas. Mr. Latimer, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Stauber, Representative Malloy, Representative Begich, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you. I'm Tim Latimer, the co-founder and CEO of Fervo Energy, and it is an honor to be with you here today in Cedar City and at the SUU campus again to discuss the progress that Fervo Energy has made, specifically at Project Cape Station, which is located just an hour north of here, which we got to visit today. Cape Station is the world's largest next-generation geothermal facility. It's the result of over a decade of collaboration between Fervo, the people of Utah, the federal government, this committee, and a broad coalition of investors, researchers, and commercial partners. But more importantly, Cape Station represents the start of something bigger, a new era of American energy, built with American innovation, American technology, and American workers. When we founded Fervo 8 years ago, we asked a simple question. If America could unlock the shale revolution through breakthrough technologies in oil and gas, why couldn't we do the same for geothermal? The answer, it turns out, is that we can, and now we have. By adapting technologies such as directional drilling, fiber optic sensing, and hydraulic fracturing techniques from the oil and gas sector, we've unlocked geothermal energy in places where it was previously impossible. In 2023, we demonstrated this with Project Red in Nevada, a commercial pilot that validated enhanced geothermal systems as a true technological breakthrough and began generating electricity for the first time in October of that year. It set new records for an individual enhanced geothermal well's flow and power output, and it laid the foundation for what we're now building at the Cape Station. Cape Station will provide 500 megawatts of firm, reliable, carbon-free, round-the-clock power, enough to serve hundreds of thousands of homes. And construction is well underway, We've already drilled more than half the wells needed for the phase 1 and partnered with Mitsubishi Heavy Industries to start construction of 3 on-site power plants. This isn't a concept or a pilot. Cape Station is a full-scale energy project in motion. What makes Cape special isn't just the technology, it's the community. We're not just developing energy here, we're building a future with and for southwestern Utah. We're creating good-paying jobs that don't disappear when construction ends, jobs that last for decades, and jobs that people can build a life around. Families in Beaver County and Millard County will see real lasting benefits because of this project. President Trump has spoken about the need for energy projects that don't just power homes, but power prosperity, support American workers, and strengthen the fabric of local communities. Cape Station is exactly that. It's not just an energy solution. It's a commitment to this place and to the people who make it strong. Of course, innovation alone is not enough. To unlock geothermal's full potential, we need smart federal policy. Today, 90% of geothermal resources lie beneath federally managed land, but permitting can take up to a decade, much longer than equivalent wind, solar, oil, or gas projects. That needs to change. And bipartisan bills like Congressman Fulcher's Clean Act and Senator Curtis's Geothermal Energy Opportunity Act are strong steps in the right direction. We also need federal investment in geothermal R&D and demonstration. The shale revolution was made possible through decades of public-private partnership. Let's apply that same model to next-generation geothermal, especially tackling drilling risk, which remains a key barrier to national deployment. We're encouraged by the initial 2026 budget request focus on firm baseload power, and we look forward to working with you to ensure geothermal is part of the strategy. In 2019, the Department of Energy's GeoVision report projected geothermal could grow 15-fold by 2050. Thanks to recent advances, even those numbers now appear conservative. Studies now estimate we can unlock over 230 gigawatts of geothermal power in the United States alone. That's more than enough to power half the country. At Cape Station, we're taking the first steps to make those projections a reality. Thank you for being here. We're proud to show you what we've built and excited with you to work with you to build America's geothermal future. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Our next witness is Mr. Jake Garfield, and he is the Deputy Director of the Utah Office of Energy Development, and he is stationed in Salt Lake City, Utah. You're up for 5 minutes.
Representative Stauber, Representative Malloy, and Representative Begich, thank you so much for the chance to be here today. My name is Jake Garfield. I'm the Deputy Director for the Utah Office of Energy Development. We're a state agency whose mission is to bring new energy sources to Utah and make sure that Utah's energy remains reliable and affordable. We are so excited about the potential of geothermal energy in Utah and so grateful for the investments from the private sector, from companies such as Fervo and Ormat, and we're so grateful for the investments being made by the Department of Energy and the University of Utah and other parties in the Forge project. In Utah, 42% of our land is managed by the BLM, and in the West Desert, most of our geothermal resources are located. That percentage is even higher. That presents both opportunities and challenges, and we're grateful to the administration of the Congress in helping us work through those challenges. We're also grateful for the BLM personnel at the state office, the local field offices, who I believe are doing their best to work through some of those challenges and help move geothermal projects forward. Today, I'd like to make 4 suggestions on how the BLM could, or how we could make changes both at the policy level and at the legislative level to help make progress on geothermal issues at the Bureau of Land Management. First, the BLM really should put more land into their annual geothermal lease sales. In the last 5 years, the Utah BLM has put up a little over 160,000 acres for geothermal lease sale in Utah. In that same time period, the Nevada BLM put over 700,000 acres up for lease sale, over 4.4 times the amount of land that went up for lease sale in Utah. The last geothermal lease sale the Utah BLM did was fantastic. It was very successful, but it was significantly larger than the past 4 years of lease sales. This discrepancy between Utah and Nevada is even more stark when you consider that the Nevada BLM hasn't even held their 2025 lease sale yet. If it can be done in Nevada, it certainly can be done here. The demand for parcels of land to potentially develop geothermal energy far exceeds the supply currently being offered by the BLM, and that's a change we would really like to see. Secondly, we'd like the BLM to consider doing broad-scale programmatic planning for geothermal development in the West. They did this type of programmatic planning in 2008, and they looked at basically just where geothermal development can happen and where it could happen if all other criteria are met. But an update to this 2008 plan could use the best available scientific data. It could use the best research to figure out where geothermal energy really is feasible and where it should happen, where it should be prioritized potentially over other land uses. Just last year, the Biden administration did a similar planning effort for solar power. And if it can be done for solar, it certainly should be done for geothermal energy, particularly since geothermal energy has far fewer impacts on the landscape and unlike solar, is a reliable baseload dispatchable source of energy. Third, we will need to see a lot of progress with permitting of transmission. Transmission is uniquely challenging for geothermal energy because unlike oil or coal, you cannot transport the source of the fuel to your generation site. We need transmission lines to go to the source of the energy itself. And right now we're permitting from the BLM and from other agencies to get transmission done simply takes far too long. We're seeing the initial construction of a long transmission line from renewable energy sites in Wyoming down to southern Nevada. That's the Trans-West Express line. So far it's taken 16 years to permit, and construction still won't be done for another 5 years. If we see delays like that with transmission, we'll never see the full build out of Utah's geothermal potential. And lastly, as we've mentioned before, we need to see progress with NEPA permitting. We need the timeline shortened for geothermal itself. As Representative Malloy mentioned in her opening remarks, there were carve-outs for oil and gas development in the Energy Act of 2005 that were not extended to geothermal development. We are so optimistic about the bills that would extend those type of categorical exclusions to geothermal development. In conclusion, thank you again for coming today. We're so grateful for the provisions in the reconciliation package, in Representative Fuller's Clean Act, in the GEO Act, and other acts of Congress that'll help us make so much progress with developing our geothermal resources. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Our next witness is Dr. Joseph Moore, and he is a research professor at the University of Utah's Energy and Geoscience Institute, and he is stationed in Salt Lake City, Utah. Dr. Moore, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Stauber and distinguished members of the subcommittee. My name is Joseph Moore, and I am a research professor at the University of Utah and a principal investigator of the Utah Frontier Observatory for Research in Geothermal Energy, or FORGE. I am honored to appear before you today to discuss the Utah FORGE project, innovative geothermal energy research project funded by the Department of Energy. I am providing testimony today as an individual and not on behalf of the University of Utah. In the 1970s, attempts to create geothermal reservoirs where none exist naturally were initiated by the Los Alamos National Laboratory. Numerous experiments followed worldwide, but none were capable of producing more than a few megawatts electric. In 2018, the DOE awarded the University of Utah a grant to build and operate a field-scale underground laboratory where tools and techniques for the creation of enhanced geothermal systems could be tested. In addition to operating the field laboratory, Utah FORGE manages 28 external R&D contracts with private companies, national laboratories, and universities. Approximately $100 million of the nearly $293 million received from the DOE has been used to fund these R&D projects. Several have led to new tools. Utah FORGE is the only field-scale laboratory in the world dedicated to EGS research. In the remaining time, I would like to highlight 3 of the key results that have been achieved. Reducing well costs was an early priority. This ultimately comes down to minimizing the number of times that the drill string must be removed from the drill hole and the bits replaced. Working with private industry, new bit designs were developed that increased the rate of penetration by 50%, leading to significant reductions in drilling costs. Second, induced seismicity is a natural consequence of reservoir creation, and even small magnitude events can lead to public concern, property damage, and project shutdowns. Our efforts are focusing on developing new monitoring tools and technologies. Information on seismic activity can be monitored by anyone in real time through our seismic data web page. Computers placed in the local libraries allow easy access to this web page. The successful stimulation of slanted and cased wells proved to be an important step in reservoir creation. In recent tests, 90% of the water injected was recovered at a temperature of 380 degrees Fahrenheit. The results of the test demonstrate low water loss and high temperatures are achievable. Prior to Utah Forge, the growth of the geothermal industry over the last 2 decades was slow. Many new companies are now investing in EGS as a result of the technological advances demonstrated at Utah Forge. Fervo located its project immediately adjacent to Utah Forge, and several other companies have leased land in the vicinity. The data generated at Utah Forge can be downloaded from the Geothermal Data Repository, free of charge. Utah Forge is a unique publicly owned and operated laboratory. It is an essential test site for EGS technology advancement and a stepping stone to hotter environments, including superhot resources. Our current 4-year contract, which began in October 24, will end in 28. There is still significant work to be done. Unless DOE provides an additional funding, we may have to plug and abandon the wells and bring the surface back to grade. We urge the committee members to continue their support of the Utah Forge project and EGS development in the United States. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on the Utah Forge project. I am happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Moore. Our final witness is Mr. Paul Thompson, and he is the Vice President of Business Development at Ormat Technologies Incorporated, and he is stationed in Reno, Nevada. Mr. Thompson, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman Stauber, Representative Malloy, and Representative Begich, and all the members of the subcommittee. I can't really contain how excited I am to be here. I first testified in front of Congress on geothermal 17 years ago. I think Tim and I did this about 7 years ago. And today, all the things that we were really pushing for then are coming to fruition. By way of introduction, my name is Paul Thompson. I am the Vice President of Business Development for Ormat Technologies. We are a global leader in geothermal power and recovered energy development, and we operate 22 power plants on federal lands in the western United States. We have 2 projects right here in Utah, one called Cove Fort and the other called Blundell. The 5 items that we really have been pushing on forever are setting timelines for permits, royalty fixes, the ability to do concurrent permitting, annual lease sales, and ESA reforms. And I'm happy to say we're making incredible progress on all of those. Ormat supports the geothermal permitting reforms initiated by this committee, including H.R. 301, thanks to Representative Malloy. These reforms aim to streamline the permitting process, allowing for quicker deployment of geothermal energy on federal lands. The GEO Act, for instance, mandates a 60-day deadline for the Department of Interior to process geothermal drilling permits. We can tell you lots of stories about getting our NEPA approval and then waiting for geothermal drilling permits for not 1 year, not 2 years, but even longer. So this legislation is just critical to that. The GEO Act is also critical at setting deadlines for processing these permits, and the legislation has already led to the issuance of long-delayed permits. We have a project called Baltazar, for example, that received its NEPA approval 3.5 years ago, and we couldn't get those geothermal drilling permits. With this committee's work and the new administration, those permits were issued thanks to the diligent work of Director John Raby and Craig Wisher from the Department of Interior. Let's move on to royalties on leases for multiple plants. In the 2005 Energy Policy Act, there was a royalty structure that said geothermal power plants should pay one royalty rate for the first 10 years, and once the plant is paid off, that royalty rate should increase. We are the first company to take a project past year 10 And kind of an unexpected consequence was that nearby facilities using the same geothermal resource were also moved into that higher royalty rate. So the committee looking at fixing that will drive much more geothermal development and wiser development, because you won't be looking to try to disturb more public lands by separating power plants just to receive better tax benefits moving forward. Concurrent consideration of multiple permits. You've heard the stories today. Geothermal has to apply for an exploration permit. That used to take 2 to 4 years. And then if we found the geothermal resource, we had to permit a utilization plan or a power plant. That took another 2 to 4 years. We have many projects that exceed 10 years in kind of the permitting regime. So this committee's work and the administration's now to allow for concurrent permitting is huge. And being able to expedite permits moving forward can drastically reduce the time of 4 to 8 years of permitting development down to something to meet our energy needs, as Representative Malloy discussed. We, last week, submitted 10 geothermal projects representing hundreds of megawatts for the accelerated permitting process under NEPA. We heard about annual lease sales. We've been pushing on that. We heard Mr. Garfield talk about it. We couldn't be happier to see more and more states putting geothermal up for leasing. It's very hard to develop it if you can't get access to those federal lands. And I'm happy to report that states like Nevada, Utah, Idaho, and Oregon are all planning to conduct lease sales this year. BLM, for example, is going to have possibly 2 lease sales this year. So we're making huge progress in that area. Lastly, I want to talk about the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has proposed many ESA listings that could impact geothermal development. They're looking at species like the Dixie Valley toad, the bleached sandhill skipper, the fish lake tui chub, the greater sage grouse, the monarch butterfly, the list goes on. And Fish and Wildlife Service really fought with the Department of Interior for the last 4 years and really stopped these projects from moving forward. We have examples of BLM not wanting to issue those permits because they were under threat of being sued by the Fish and Wildlife Service. That's not really how the process is meant to work. We shouldn't have regulatory capture due to the threat of litigation. So we urge the committee to address the interagency conflicts that hinder geothermal energy exploration. ORMAT is dedicated to advancing geothermal energy on federal lands. It supports this committee's, the President's, and the Secretary's energy production goals for fostering job creation and economic development. We appreciate your support and look forward to collaborating to unlock geothermal energy's full potential in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The chair will now recognize members for 5 minutes of questions, and I recognize myself for 5 minutes. In 2019, under President Trump's leadership, the Department of Energy released its report, GeoVision, Harnessing the Heat Beneath Our Feet, which estimated geothermal could provide over 120 gigawatts of electricity by 2050. For context, the entire domestic grid currently produces 1,250 gigawatts today, per the EIA. The Department of Energy estimate predated many technological advances that Fervo has made in just the past 5 years that has vastly grown geothermal's potential scale and has made it viable across multiple geographies. Mr. Latimer, could you please describe how making it easier to permit geothermal energy development on federal lands would increase energy dominance?
Thank you so much for the question, Chairman. And indeed, it's been an exciting time in geothermal. I'd say not just Fervo, but also the pioneering work you heard from Dr. Moore at the Utah Forge site means that almost as soon as that document was printed, and it was a great effort to coordinate all of the information about geothermal innovation, it was out of date. And we have pushed forward numerous technology innovations that allow it that make it easier for us to find geothermal. We've between our pilot project and today, as I mentioned to you earlier today, we've reduced drilling costs by over 70%. And that takes geothermal from a niche resource that can't really have much impact on the grid to one that we can do in many, many more locations and at much greater scale. And so we're quite excited. You know, it's difficult for the data to keep up with how fast the technology innovations are happening. So I think the potential is even greater for that. But of course, as you mentioned, it also requires better permitting, because what we see is an urgent need for there to be reliable, clean, firm power on the grid. And if you hear about the timelines, for example, that Mr. Thompson talked about earlier, if we want to have cleaner energy on the grid and it be based round the clock, firm power, but it takes us 10 years to start construction, we're not going to be in a position where we can have the positive impact that we want to. So oftentimes, our projects, we have the technology ready to go, we have the supply chain ready to go, and we are in a position where we're waiting for these multiple redundant permitting applications. I think there's a way to do these projects with a very high quality without sacrificing any of the environmental attributes, but just doing some of the reforms that are in the bills that you have proposed allow us to really just remove some of the redundancy in the system that lets this grow much faster. And I think the real question is that a goal we want to set for mid-century or beyond, or do we want to have this ramp up and reliable firm power from geothermal happen much more quickly? And if that's the case, if we want to have more impact sooner, there has to be a way to streamline the permitting reforms with reforms like what this committee's talked about.
So would you say, I think I know the answer, that Fervo or other developers are sitting on sidelines in terms of developing additional projects because of these permitting challenges?
I think that's right. And I think one of the things that to say is, the numbers we've discussed today, where sometimes it can take over a decade to permit these projects, those are only the projects that actually move forward to get far enough to even enter the permitting queue. And I can tell you, we've had numerous projects where we've had community support, we've had high quality geology, we've looked at and had some sort of transmission solution, but we haven't even prioritized investing in the project yet because we didn't see a viable pathway to getting permits. And much like Paul talked about with your MAT experience, we have numerous examples where our permits have sat for years without even getting an answer or a review. And I think really having a renaissance in energy the way we need to, we have to address those fundamental issues.
It's simply not acceptable for permits to sit for years and years on end when we have the technology and the expertise and the investment wanting to do so. You know, geothermal power faces a unique challenge in the fact that reviews under NEPA have to be completed in sequence, or one after the other rather than simultaneously. This includes land use planning, pre-leasing exploration, drilling, well field development, power plant construction, and transmission, all of which have to be done separately. This means drastically increased project timelines and costs, all of which hit American consumers, both in terms of the cost of energy and the reliability of our electric grid. This completely is the opposite of what we should be doing. Getting more reliable, abundant, and affordable online energy that is demanded continues to skyrocket. The energy demand is only going to go up as we move into the AI race, et cetera. It is energy that is going to bring that dominance to this great nation. So, Mr. Thompson, you know what? I'm going to wait for probably my second round to ask you that question. So now I will go to Representative Malloy for 5 minutes of her questioning.
Thank you. I'm going to start with a question to Mr. Latimer and Mr. Moore both, because you both touched on this, and today, when we were on the field trip part of this, we talked about it a little bit, but will both of you speak to the importance of having government research and combining it with private investment like we're doing in Beaver County, and why that's so important to developing resources?
Your mic.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. When we started Forge, projects had been done around the world, and none had been able to produce more than 2 or 3 or 4 megawatts of electric. And this had been recognized. Key problem: we didn't have the tools, we didn't know how to do the exploration, we didn't know how to do the drilling. And as Tim said, a lot of this came from the oil and gas industry. In fact, the objective of Forge was to take oil and gas tools and upgrade them, make them more useful. And we learned very quickly many of the tools didn't work at the temperatures of Forge. We're up at 500 degrees Fahrenheit, so we're quite hot. There was no infrastructure to build these tools. There was no reason the oil and gas industry, for example, would build tools suitable for high temperatures. We didn't have the drilling techniques, for example, the bits that we needed. And Forge has now drilled 7 or 8 wells, deepest is 9,500 feet. It is the only commercial scale R&D facility in the world. And that's really critical because we are testing new tools. I mentioned we have 28 R&D projects that Forge funds it. I don't think we would have seen the increase in enthusiasm really from the geothermal industry, and I must admit from the oil and gas industry as well, to get back into geothermal. And I think without FRBO's work, that wouldn't have happened, but fortunately, they're using some of the tools that are being developed.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would echo that and say that, you know, just to make this concrete, the value of some of these public-private partnerships is oftentimes it's difficult to attract private sector investment to do truly innovative things. So when FRBO started in 2018, we raised the seed round to get started. We raised about $500,000, and we had to scrap and fight to find look over every stone to find that funding. And more often than not, the answer we got was, well, how do you know you have something there when you drill geothermal? This is uncertain. You can't see what's down there. And we did a lot of feasibility testing with that funding, but we realized to do the next step, we needed to raise $10 million, not $500,000. And we faced that same skepticism from the investors. What if the resource isn't there? What if you can't drill it? Well, around that time we were raising that next round of funding so we could progress our technology forward. The Utah Forge team published their results on drilling the wells there. And we were able to point and say, look, here's some of the drilling techniques that we're proposing to use that have been de-risked. And on top of that, we actually are going to site our project right next door to theirs, so we can leverage the available data that Joe talked about earlier on the geothermal data repository. And I don't think we would have been successful in raising the private sector funds needed for a new venture had we not had this ability to leverage resources done by the national labs and the universities and supported the Department of Energy. And I think that's where these partnerships are critical in times where you could have something with phenomenal impact on society, but where the private sector is insufficient to fund it, and you can partner together in a research collaboration that really moves the needle. And what we're doing in Beaver County through the partnership with Utah Forge is, I think, a tremendous example of this working well.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson, I have a short time left, but I'm going to give you a really short question. You said that you testified about this 17 years ago, and I assume that you're excited to see some of these things starting to move, but you also have a really bipartisan background. And I think when we talk about permitting reform, sometimes politics get involved, and there's some skepticism that if we streamline permitting, we can do things in a clean, safe, environmental way. How confident are you that we can do geothermal permitting faster and protect the environment?
I'm very confident. I think we have shown we can do the baseline studies, we can comply with NEPA. You know, one of the amazing things about geothermal is it has a footprint disturbance 22 times smaller than solar with integrated storage. These typical power plants, as you probably saw today, take up a 15 to 20 acre pad. The geothermal reservoir is preserved into perpetuity if managed correctly. ORMAT has been in operation since 1985. We've never had a take permit associated with one of our projects. We can move the geothermal power plants, we can move the wells and so forth to make them as benign as possible to the surrounding environment. Couple that with no emissions and baseload power, the environmental footprint of these facilities is just astonishing. And the fact that it takes almost as long to permit a mining site is an example of just waiting too long. And what your bill does is say once NEPA is complete, it doesn't short shrift the NEPA process at all. It just says once it's done, the administrators in these offices need to issue these permits timely.
Thank you. My time's expired. I'll have follow-up questions during the next round.
Before I go to Representative Begich from the great state of Alaska, because you brought up mining, I will tell you, it takes 29 years on average to open up a mine in the United States of America. 29 years. And now we're going to go to Representative Begich for 5 minutes from the great state of Alaska.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first question is to Mr. Latimer. Mr. Latimer, we know that geothermal is kind of lumped in to this category that we call renewable resources. We got solar, we got wind, we've got hydro, we got geothermal. Now, with solar and wind, what we've seen in a couple of significant examples, we saw this in Texas, we saw this recently in Spain, we've seen it in Germany. They may be renewable resources, but they're not necessarily reliable resources. Hydro and geothermal, of course, are sustained resources. They're base load, they're reliable. Can you speak to the importance of reliable base load power versus what some might call fair weather power?
Yeah, and I think I very much appreciated the chairman's opening comments about there being such an acute need for energy that we really need to be looking at all these resources. And I think there's valuable parts of solar and wind that can add to the grid, but it's also important to distinguish where geothermal offers value where solar and wind may not. And it is something that, even if the weather changes, the earth is always hot, and it has been for 4 billion years, and it will continue to be for a few billion more. And so as a result, we have a load profile that's far more reliable. And actually what we're seeing in our offtake contracts with our customers is reliability is sort of the key focus of off-takers today. And so actually, we struggled a little bit. We were in a very different power market when we started the business over 7 years ago. To really get people to really hold on to the value of what this reliability means. And there were two big events that happened in the United States that really made a difference. One was in August of 2020, the state of California experienced rolling blackouts for the first time in over 2 decades as a result of a very hot summer evening that really stressed the electric grid. And then in Texas, my home state, many of us, myself included, lost power for over 5 days in Winter Storm Uri just a few months later. And all of a sudden, you saw reliability go from an afterthought in planning processes for power to first and foremost. And we saw a number of state regulatory changes that ascribed value to something that provides power around the clock. And geothermal is unique in its ability to do that. It works in warm weather, it works in cold weather. Everybody knows Iceland's a geothermal country, so if you want to know if it works in cold weather, there's your answer. And it also provides that rotating inertia that's very valuable to the grid. And what we're seeing is more and more our customers are looking at how do they meet their goals when it comes to reliability, cost, and sustainability and emissions. And more they're coming to the answer that geothermal plays a huge role in that mix because we just offer different value that other energy resources haven't. And that's been a huge part of explaining this renaissance in geothermal.
And it's just a follow-up question. We often see that emerging power technologies require heavy subsidies in order to exist and be somewhat competitive to traditional energy. Thinking long-term, do you think that geothermal is going to be cost competitive to other forms of more traditional energy, and kind of maybe some commentary around that?
Absolutely. The technology innovations we're talking about that we've pioneered and that the University of Utah has pioneered and that the DOE supported are very new. And so there's still a lot of learning that's happening. And so even between our first and second project here in Beaver County, Utah, we're reducing our cost by over 30%. And so we're at a very steep part of the learning curve, actually, where the support from the DOE and the investment tax credits that are on the books make a big difference for getting our industry off the ground. But our mission at Fervo, and I don't think we would be doing this if we didn't think this was the case, is that we're on a cost trajectory where within a few years, it's going to be the cheapest form of power, period. And that's with or without subsidies. That's whether or not you factor it clean, dirty, reliable, you name it. We just want to have the cheapest form of electricity, period. And the fact that it is clean and it does have these reliability attributes are very, very positive. But when you look at the technology cost structure, the trajectory we are on, we have every confidence that this is going to be the lowest cost way to get electricity to people within the next 5 to 10 years. And that's what we're after.
That's very exciting. I appreciate that commentary, and I will now yield to the chair. I'll have follow-up questions in round 2.
Thank you very much. So at the chair's request, I am going to go a second round of questioning. I think that we traveled here. We have the audience members. There's still some more questions that I have, and I'm going to recognize myself for the next second round of questionings. Mr. Thompson, if Congress were to change these requirements and allow different steps of the NEPA process to run concurrently, what kind of impact would that have on our ability to get geothermal projects built and brought online in a timely fashion?
Chairman, thank you for the question. I think we touched on it a little bit with the DOE GeoVision report, that if we can reduce the permitting timelines, we can unleash gigawatts of generation for geothermal deployment. I'll just elaborate a little bit. We've talked about the technology at Fervo today. We've talked about technologies that capture low temperature heat. There is a huge amount of resource out there for geothermal development today with, older technologies, traditional technologies, new technologies, advancing technologies to be developed. And the single biggest hurdle has been permitting. And I've been harping on that for over a decade. And again, I think, to touch on the point that we do comprehensive baseline studies. We do comprehensive numerical water modeling. And what sets geothermal apart, which I think is important to say, is we have to have a symbiotic relationship with the resource. We don't go in and try to extract something and leave. We have to, if we want to be successful, operate a power plant for about 2 decades, 20 years. The amortization rate is about 10 years. So we become incredibly good stewards of the land and the reservoir because we have the same goal in mind, to maximize the amount of power we can produce, the revenue that we generate. We have to protect those precious geothermal reservoirs, and we invest in an incredible amount of time and money to do just that.
Thank you. Mr. Garfield, how long does it take for the state of Utah to permit a geothermal project on state lands?
I've been discussing this question with our state land agency. I was asking that, how long does it take? And they said they really can't put a number on it because geothermal energy is so new, especially on state lands. But they did say that, and the projects, we do have a couple of projects, but they've taken, they've been unique circumstances each time, but they said they could get things permitted very quickly, much quicker than the BLM, fundamentally because we don't have a NEPA type statute in Utah. They're cognizant of what they're doing. When they get a proposal for a development, they make sure that the land will not be degraded, that there's measures for mitigation, for reclamation of the land later, but they're not required under statute to do the type of duplicative and onerous analysis that's required under NEPA. And that fundamentally is why both our state trust lands agency and other state agencies are able to do this type of permitting much quicker than at the federal level.
So it's safe to say that Utah understands that the federal government is simply not getting it yet. And that's why these hearings are so important. So Mr. Thompson brought something, we talked about permitting. We've all talked about permitting here. You know, if we don't accelerate it, we're going to be left behind. I'm going to give you an example. If we don't get a bridge permitted in northern Minnesota and finished by early November, December, if there's a permitting problem, that waits for 5 months till the road restrictions come off in the spring, and that time is money. And you're looking at geothermal. Time is money. You're looking for that investment to come on board. I can tell you, Mr. Latimer, I was extremely impressed with Fervo today, and I will tell the audience members, as the Chair of Energy and Minerals Resources, your Utah reps are really pushing geothermal, almost not only my committee, but the full committee, pushing geothermal. To come out here and actually see what you're doing, this is that next-gen opportunity, and I commend you for all the work you did. Mr. Moore, you've been doing this for a lot of years, and you're studying, and you're seeing the work that you put in and the technology, and I hope that you know that we appreciate it, the next generation appreciates it, and we certainly appreciate the state of Utah leading that. And just by meeting a few of you earlier today, the enthusiasm, the get-it-done attitude. Mr. Thompson, you brought up something very important. In Minnesota, we mine, right? I'm a pro-mining environmentalist. Nobody gets to own that term because I live there, I work there, I've raised my family there, I'm going to pass away there in my home state of Minnesota, where we lead in mining with the exception of the great state of Alaska. So I just want to, as I close my comments, I just want to say thank you very much. It's just an exceptional day at Fervo. And with that being said, Representative Malloy, you're up for your second round of questioning.
Thank you. Mr. Garfield, I want to follow up on the questions that the chairman just asked you. How does the state of Utah's permitting process for geothermal development differ from the state's typical permitting process? Can you speak to that?
Different from other permitting processes for other developments?
Mm-hmm.
It is so new. I think there's a lot that's still going on here, but I would be happy to ask that question of our permitting agencies and get back to you with more information.
I'll follow up in writing afterward
Please
with that
do.
one, so you can talk to your counterparts in the state. But where does the process break down most often for the state in trying to get energy projects permitted? Can you tell me that?
At the state level?
Uh-huh.
That's another question I should probably
Okay,
get back
I'll
to our
follow up
permitting
in
agencies.
writing with that one, too.
Yeah.
I'll get you off the hot seat. Mr. Thompson, I said I was going to follow up with you on your answers, and one of the things I want to follow up with you on, because you've been doing this for so long, will you talk about the impact that we all know we need to produce more energy in this country. We know that there's a need for increased energy production, but even looking backward, we've been producing geothermal energy in rural areas. Can you talk about the impact that has on the economies of rural areas when we have sustainable energy being produced?
Absolutely. Thank you. Through the chair to Representative Malloy. You know, once you have a geothermal project up and running, it requires very few employees to operate it. We don't really have a burden on police stations, fire stations, et cetera. We've had county commissioners refer to our power plants as ATMs in the desert in rural Nevada. But the impact, because when you produce power 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year, and sell that electricity under a power purchase agreement, you create a good amount of revenue. And in the state of Nevada, for example, a huge portion of that goes back to the local counties. And so in states that have a lot of federally owned land, where they're not always getting the payment in lieu of taxes from the federal government, these projects have an astonishing effect. We're probably the largest employer in many rural counties in Nevada, next to mining, which is the biggest employer in northeastern Nevada. So the impact is just huge. And I would, if I can, I'd go back to one of the previous questions about, you know, the impact on the work at Utah and the public-private partnership. What's unique about geothermal is that we can't bottle up the electricity and put it on the USS Duracell and ship it to the highest bidder. It's a U.S. domestic product. The price is controlled by the U.S. market. So whether we're in Nevada or Utah, we can only sell the electricity for what the Public Utilities Commissions will limit. So it's, you know, it's got a cap on its energy, on its price point that we can get for it. We can't gouge ratepayers. It also limited us from what we could spend in subsurface research. So the public-private partnership from like the University of Utah and the Department of Energy to go after the subsurface work has just been critically important and brings in world-class researchers to work on these projects. The University of Nevada, the University of Utah. Every time we're working on an advanced EGS project, experts fly in from all over the world to help and work in these communities, and it's really astonishing to see the impacts.
When you're hiring people to run the plants once they're up and running, how often do you hire local talent?
Almost always. You know, coming from a small town, you know, we have very rural power plant locations, and the best people to have work there are the local employees. We can teach them to use a voltmeter and work at the power plants. We employ tribal members at our projects because they are the best stewards of the land and know what's going on in that community.
Thank you. Mr. Latimer, just really fast because I'm almost out of time. When we were out on site today, you talked about how the research you're doing is going to unlock your ability to produce geothermal energy, hopefully, in a lot of places we don't think of as geothermal right now. Will you just in 30 seconds say how widespread that could be?
Yes, it could easily be nationwide, and then the mission is to take that around the world. It's purely a function of cost, and we've dropped costs so quickly, and we're on a trajectory to drop it even more. It's going to unlock a huge resource. We can drill a well now to 15,000 feet deep for what we thought we could drill a well to 5,000 feet deep just a couple of years ago because of the drilling innovations we've had. And that means that while we're here in Utah because of the great local support and the great policy support, it's also because of the great geology. But what we're learning here allows us to develop the technologies that allow us to take this to other communities all across the country because we're lowering the drilling cost of development.
Thank you. My time's expired.
Thank you very much. Representative Begich, your second round of 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First question to Mr. Thompson. Stranded geothermal must be connected to the grid. What level of core grid investment is required nationwide, and you can give me a directional ballpark, to fully utilize our nation's geothermal potential?
Thank you very much for the question. Through the chair to Representative Begich. I was discussing this actually driving in today, that I think with all the progress that we're going to see on permitting, the next hurdle will be transmission and interconnection of these facilities. I think a lot of what this committee has discussed in kind of streamlining permitting needs to apply to transmission infrastructure, and we're going to need to build more. However, I also think we need to look at the existing transmission infrastructure. Today, it is a very archaic process. If you take a transmission position and you have your 30 megawatts, whether you use it or not, or whether it's an intermittent resource or not, you lock up that portion of the transmission. I would be willing to bet today that our entire transmission infrastructure is used about 50% of the time. And I think a real hard look at the open access tariff program at FERC and trying to figure out a very smart way to say, I need to use my existing transmission assets more efficiently, would unleash a huge amount of development. You know, these intermittent resources we talked about, we know some of them don't work when the sun goes down, but that transmission that they've procured is locked up. And so it's just amazing to me that load-serving entities and utilities aren't driving after this because more energy.
Okay. And
We'll use seismic reflection to locate the top of the granite, where we're going to drill into it. We look for faults and fractures in the rocks. We're actually not trying to produce from them. We drill a test well, and probably the biggest and most important step is to drill a test well that is deep enough. So the first well we drilled was 8,000 feet deep, and that gave us information on temperature, which is absolutely critical, stress field. We have to know which way the Earth's forces are pushing against us, so we drill in the proper directions. Again, rock type. And so those are pretty basic. I would guess typical, like at Ford, $10 million to do the basic exploration.
thank you. That's a relatively low-cost investment relative to other exploratory activities in the energy space. My time has expired, and I appreciate your commentary. Thank you.
I want to thank the witnesses for your valuable testimony and to my congressional members for their questioning. Without question, Utah leads in geothermal, and I think for many, many years you will. The expertise, the opportunities you have here. The members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to these in writing. Under Committee Rule 3, members of the committee must submit questions to the committee clerk by 5 p.m. on Thursday, May 15th. The hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for these responses. And before I gavel out, I want to recognize SUU President Mindy Benson in the audience for your hospitality. It's greatly appreciated. What a wonderful university. Thank you, President Benson. I also want to thank the audience for your attendance. What an opportunity your great state has. And of course, Representative Malloy, who has brought me to your great state twice now. Utah is something special, and it's a privilege serving with you in Congress. And I'm just going to put in a shameless plug. Minnesota is the state of hockey. The Utah Mammoth just signed my nephew Jackson Stauber as a goaltender for another 2 years. So if there's no further business, the committee stands adjourned. Thank you all. Be safe.